My name is Annalise Dubois. For the first 17 years of my life, I lived in the quiet, tree-lined town of Willow Creek, a place where the seasons were as reliable as the Sunday church bells. Our house, an architectural marvel of glass and steel designed by my father, stood on a hill overlooking the town. It was a beautiful cage, a testament to my father's belief in order and my mother's dedication to appearances. I was the elder of two daughters, the cellist, the one whose future was as meticulously planned as the blueprints for our home. And for the last year, I've been learning that the most beautiful surfaces can hide the deepest cracks. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A quiet, insidious fatigue that settled into my bones like a winter chill, even in the heart of summer. It was a weariness that sleep couldn't touch. My fingers, once so nimble on the strings of my cello, grew clumsy. The intricate dance of a Bach suite became a fumbling, painful effort. The music, once my sanctuary, became a measure of my decline. "You're just overdoing it, Annalise," my mother, Catherine, would say, her voice a smooth, polished stone. She'd be arranging flowers in a minimalist vase, her movements graceful and precise. "Your audition for the conservatory is months away. There's no need to practice yourself into exhaustion." Her concern was a beautifully wrapped, empty box. It looked the part, but held nothing inside. She saw not a daughter struggling, but a slight imperfection in the family portrait she so carefully curated. My father, Marcus, was a man of logic and structure. He saw the world in straight lines and right angles. My vague, shapeless ailments didn't fit into his schematics. Anemia, perhaps, he declared one evening at our long, sterile dining table after I'd confessed to a dizzy spell during practice. "Catherine, make sure cook adds more spinach to her diet. We can't have her fainting during a performance. Think of the optics." He wasn't talking to me, but about me, as if I were a project with a deadline. The optics were everything. My father was a celebrated architect, my mother the chair of every significant charity board in Willow Creek. The Duboises were a brand, synonymous with success, taste, and quiet prestige. A sick daughter was an unacceptable variable, a smudge on the pristine blueprint of our lives. My younger sister, Sophie, who was 13, watched these exchanges with wide, uncertain eyes. She had always looked up to me, trailing me to my practice room to listen, her head tilted in admiration. But now she was caught in the crosscurrent of my quiet desperation and our parents' resolute denial. She heard them whispering when they thought she couldn't. "She's always been so dramatic. It's the pressure. She's manufacturing a reason to fail." Slowly, her admiration for me became tinged with a confused pity, the kind you feel for someone who can't seem to get their act together. The whispers of the illness grew louder. The fatigue was joined by a deep, aching pain in my abdomen that would come in waves, stealing my breath and leaving me doubled over. Bruises bloomed on my skin like faint, purple watercolor paintings, with no memory of an injury to cause them. One crisp October morning, the pain was a clenched fist in my gut. I sat at the breakfast table, the scent of coffee and toasted sourdough turning my stomach. I pushed my plate away, my hand trembling as I clutched my side. "Mom," I managed, my voice thin. "I really don't feel well. The pain, it's different today." My mother sighed, a delicate, exasperated sound. She was scrolling through emails on her tablet, organizing a silent auction for the Historical Society. "Darling, we've been through this. It's nerves. You have that quartet rehearsal today. Just eat something. A little protein will settle your stomach." "It's not nerves," I insisted, a desperate edge to my voice. "Please, I think I need to see a doctor." My father lowered his newspaper, his gaze sharp and impatient. "Annalise, that's enough. We have indulged these fantasies of yours for months. We took you to Dr. Peterson in August, and what did he find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A clean bill of health. He didn't listen." I cried, the frustration bubbling over. He was in the room for 5 minutes. He told me to drink more water and get more sleep. Because that's the advice for a healthy, if slightly overwrought, teenage girl, my father said, his voice clipped and final. He folded his newspaper with a sharp crack. "You will go to school. You will attend your rehearsal. You will not disrupt your Mother's Day with another manufactured crisis. Is that understood? Tears of helplessness pricked my eyes. I looked at Sophie, who quickly dropped her gaze to her cereal bowl, her shoulders hunched. She was learning the family lesson. Dissent was not an option. Compliance was the currency of love in our house. I nodded, the motion sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. I somehow made it through the school day, moving through the hallways like a ghost. The world seemed muted, muffled by the cotton of my exhaustion and the constant, grinding pain. My best friend, Olivia, found me in the library during lunch period, my head resting on a thick volume of world history. "Annie," she said softly, touching my shoulder. I flinched. Her face, usually so bright and full of life, was etched with worry. "You look terrible. You're as pale as the paper in this book." Olivia was my one anchor to reality. She never doubted me. She saw the deepening shadows under my eyes, the way I braced myself against the lockers when a wave of dizziness hit. She saw the bruises I tried to hide under long sleeves. "My parents," I whispered, not having the energy to say more. "They're still not listening?" she asked, her voice laced with an anger she felt on my behalf. I just shook my head, pressing my knuckles into my abdomen. "Olivia, it hurts so much today. I don't know how I'm going to get through rehearsal." "Then don't," she said fiercely. "Tell Mr. Bennett you're sick. Go home. And face them? They'll say I'm shirking my responsibilities. They'll take my cello away for a week to teach me a lesson about commitment. It's easier to just endure." Endurance had become my primary skill. I endured the pain, the exhaustion, the casual dismissals, the slow erosion of my own belief in myself. Was I going crazy? Was this all in my head, a psychological rebellion against the life of perfect achievement laid out for me? My parents' narrative was so strong, so consistent, that it was beginning to seep into my own thoughts, poisoning my certainty. That afternoon, I walked into the school's music annex, the scent of wood polish and old sheet music a familiar comfort. My cello, leaning against my designated chair in the small rehearsal room, felt like an old friend I no longer knew how to talk to. Mr. Bennett, a kind man with a fraying tweed jacket and a genuine love for music, greeted me with a warm smile. "Annalise, ready to bring Brahms to life?" I tried to smile back, a weak imitation of my usual enthusiasm. The other members of the quartet were already there, tuning their instruments. The familiar, discordant symphony of A strings being plucked and bowed usually thrilled me. Today, it was just noise. We began to play. For a few bars, I lost myself in the music. My fingers moved from muscle memory, the bow gliding across the strings, the deep, resonant voice of the cello singing out. It was a brief, beautiful reprieve. Then, the fist in my gut tightened with vicious force. A gasp escaped my lips and my bow skittered across the strings, creating a sound like a wounded animal. "Annalise." Mr. Bennett's voice was sharp with concern. I tried to answer, to say, "I'm fine," the familiar lie. But no words came out. The four walls of the room seemed to be closing in. The notes on the page swam before my eyes, melting into a black, swirling vortex. The concerned faces of my friends blurred. I felt my grip on the neck of my cello loosen, and a distant, horrified part of my brain registered the terrible, resonant thud as it slipped from my grasp and crashed onto the polished wooden floor. The last thing I heard before the world dissolved into blackness was Mr. Bennett shouting my name, his voice echoing in a cavern of pain. I surfaced slowly, like a diver ascending from a great depth. The first thing I registered was a gentle, rhythmic beeping. The second was the cool, firm hand on my own. I blinked, my vision blurry, and saw the worried face of Mr. Bennett looking down at me. We were in the school nurse's office. "Annalise. Welcome back," he said, his voice soft. "You gave us all quite a scare." "My cello," I whispered, the memory of the crash replaying in my mind. "Is fine. A few scratches, but nothing a good luthier can't fix. Right now, we're more worried about the cellist." He squeezed my hand. "I've called your parents. They're on their way." A familiar dread coiled in my stomach, competing with the physical pain. This would be a new chapter in the Annalise's dramatic episode saga. I braced myself for their arrival, for the thinly veiled fury and public embarrassment. When they swept into the nurse's office 10 minutes later, they did not disappoint. My mother's face was a mask of strained civility, her smile tight as she addressed the nurse. "We are so terribly sorry for this disruption. Annalise has a tendency to be a bit theatrical." My father stood behind her, arms crossed, radiating impatience. "We'll take her home. A good night's sleep is all she needs." Mr. Bennet, who had remained by my side, stood up. He was not a tall man, but he seemed to grow in stature as he faced my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Du Bois," he began, his tone polite but unyielding. "I have been Annalise's music teacher for 3 years. I have seen her practice through sprained wrists and head colds. I have seen her dedication. What I saw today was not theatricality. It was a physical collapse." "With all due respect, Mr. Bennet," my father cut in, his voice dangerously smooth, "you are a music teacher. You are not a physician. We are her parents, and we will decide what is best for her. And I," a new voice said firmly, "am a mandated reporter." The school nurse, Mrs. Evans, stepped forward. She was a stout, no-nonsense woman whom I'd only ever seen for scraped knees and headaches. Now, her expression was grave. "Your daughter's blood pressure is alarmingly low. She's tachycardic. And frankly, the bruising on her arms is deeply concerning. I cannot, in good conscience, release her to you to just sleep it off. She needs to be evaluated at a hospital." My mother's composure finally fractured. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed her face before being replaced by indignation. "Are you implying we are neglectful?" "I am stating a fact, Mrs. Du Bois," Mrs. Evans said, her gaze unwavering. "Your daughter is exhibiting clear signs of a serious medical issue. As per school policy and state law, if you refuse to take her to the emergency room, I will be forced to call an ambulance and make a report to Child Protective Services." The air in the small office crackled with tension. Child Protective Services. The words were a bomb detonated in the center of my parents' carefully constructed world. The threat was not to my health, but to their reputation. It was the only language they understood. My father's face went dark with a silent, simmering fury. He stared at Mrs. Evans, then at Mr. Bennet, his jaw tight. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the beeping of the blood pressure cuff still on my arm. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low growl. "Fine. Get in the car, Annalise." He turned to Mrs. Evans. "But when the hospital finds nothing, as they always do, you can expect to hear from our attorney." "I'll take that risk, Mr. Du Bois," Mrs. Evans replied calmly. "It's a risk worth taking." The drive to Willow Creek General was a silent, suffocating ordeal. My mother stared out the window, her fingers twisting the handle of her leather handbag. My father gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I was huddled in the back seat, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The decision was no longer mine. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting to be heard. Someone else was fighting for me. For better or worse, something was about to change. I didn't know then that the foundation of our family was about to be shaken to its core, and that the truth, when it finally arrived, would be far more devastating and liberating than I could have ever imagined. The emergency room was a world of controlled chaos, smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. My parents presented our insurance card with the air of people accustomed to VIP treatment, but here, in the stark reality of medicine, their social standing was irrelevant. We were just another family in a curtained-off cubicle. A young doctor with tired, kind eyes examined me, his questions gentle but persistent. He listened, truly listened, as I recounted the months of fatigue, the pain, the bruises, the dizziness. He pressed gently on my abdomen, and I couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath. He looked from my pale face to my parents, who stood stiffly in the corner, their impatience radiating like heat. "We're going to run some blood work, a comprehensive panel," he said, his expression unreadable. "It'll take an hour or so to get the initial results back." My father sighed audibly. "Is that really necessary? We have a function to attend this evening." The doctor's gaze held my father's for a moment. "Yes, Mr. Du Bois. It's really necessary." While we waited, my mother's composure began to reassemble itself. "This is a colossal waste of time," she murmured, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. That nurse overstepped her authority. "Marcus, you must call David tomorrow." David was their lawyer. I closed my eyes, letting their words wash over me. I felt strangely detached, as if I were observing a scene from a play. I was too tired to be angry, too weak to be afraid. All I felt was a profound, hollow emptiness and a single, desperate prayer. Please let them find something. Please don't let me be crazy. An hour later, the doctor returned. He was not alone. With him was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, commanding presence. The young doctor's face was no longer unreadable, it was grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Dubois," the woman said, her voice even and direct. She introduced herself as Dr. Evelyn Reed, a hematologist-oncologist. The title hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I was called down to consult on Annalise's blood work. "We need to talk." My father, who had been about to protest the wait, fell silent. My mother's hand flew to her throat. The casual annoyance in the room evaporated, replaced by a sudden, freezing dread. Dr. Reed pulled up a stool and sat down, her focus entirely on me. "Annalise, your blood counts are highly irregular. Your white blood cell count is extremely elevated, but they're not mature, functional cells. And your platelet and red blood cell counts are critically low. This explains the fatigue, the bruising, the pain." She spoke to me, not my parents. She validated my experience in a few clinical sentences, and I felt a flood of relief so powerful it almost made me weep. I wasn't crazy. It was real. My mother found her voice, though it was strained and high-pitched. "What are you saying? What does that mean?" Dr. Reed turned her gaze to my parents. The calm in her eyes was now layered with a professional severity that was more chilling than any anger. "It means we need to admit Annalise immediately for a bone marrow biopsy to confirm, but these results are highly indicative of an acute leukemia." Leukemia. The word landed in the sterile cubicle with the force of a physical blow. It was a word from tragic movies and fundraising campaigns, not from our pristine, ordered life in Willow Creek. My father took a step forward, his face a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible. You're mistaken. She was fine. She's an athlete, a musician." "Mr. Dubois," Dr. Reed interrupted, her voice cutting through his denial like a scalpel. "Your daughter has not been fine for some time. Based on what she's told us, she has been symptomatic for at least 9 months. 9 months." She let the words sink in, a quiet, damning indictment. Acute leukemias progress rapidly. The delay in diagnosis has allowed the disease to advance significantly. We need to begin treatment as soon as we have the biopsy confirmation. My mother made a small, wounded sound. But we thought she was being dramatic. For attention, we just thought her perfectly constructed world was shattering, and she was left stammering amidst the ruins. "You thought wrong," Dr. Reed said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "And I have to be frank. This delay, this dismissal of her symptoms, has compromised her prognosis. We are facing a much more difficult fight than we might have if she'd been brought in when her symptoms began." The weight of that statement finally crushed my father's blustering denial. He sank onto the edge of the visitor's chair, his face ashen. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for what felt like the first time in a year. And in his eyes I saw not anger or impatience, but a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. He saw the pale skin, the faint bruises on my arms, the exhaustion that clung to me like a shroud. He was seeing the truth. "I tried to tell you," I whispered, and the tears I'd held back for so long finally came, hot and silent. "I begged you." My mother let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound I had never heard from her before. The perfect, polished Catherine Dubois was gone, replaced by a terrified mother drowning in guilt. Everything after that was a blur. I was moved from the ER to the oncology floor, a quiet, hushed wing of the hospital that felt like a different universe. A kind, warm nurse named Clara settled me into a private room. She spoke to me with a gentle directness, explaining the machines, the 4-pole she called my new best friend, and the plan for the next few days. She saw the fear in my eyes and the way I flinched when she touched my bruised arm to draw more blood. "It's a lot to take in, honey," she said, her voice like a warm blanket. "But you're in the right place now. We're going to take very good care of you." Later that evening, after my parents had been sent to a waiting room to fill out endless forms, Sophie was allowed to visit. She crept into the room, her small frame looking lost in the sterile environment. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with a fear she didn't understand. "Annie," she whispered, using her childhood name for me. They said you have cancer. Is it true? Mom and Dad always said you were just sad." I patted the edge of my bed, and she perched on it hesitantly, as if I might break. "It's true, sophomore. I've been very sick for a long time. They didn't see it." Her face crumpled, and she launched herself into my arms, burying her face in my hospital gown. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I thought you were just trying to get out of things, and I was mean to you. I'm so sorry." I held her tight, my own tears soaking into her hair. "It's not your fault," I whispered, stroking her back. "You're a kid. You listen to Mom and Dad. They're the grown-ups. They were supposed to know." Through the partly open door, I could hear my parents' voices, low and strained, talking to Dr. Reed in the hallway. My father's voice was stripped of its usual authority, replaced with a desperate, pleading tone. My mother's was just a series of choked sobs. "How could we have missed it?" my mother wept. "What kind of parents are we?" Lying there in the quiet room, with the rhythmic beep of the monitor as the new soundtrack of my life, I didn't feel anger or triumph. I just felt a profound, aching sadness. The truth was finally out, but it had come at a terrible cost. Our family, the perfect house of Dubois, had been built on a foundation of denial, and the storm had finally brought it crashing down. And I was standing in the rubble. The weeks that followed my diagnosis bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of chemotherapy infusions, blood tests, and long, quiet hours spent staring at the ceiling of my hospital room. The world outside my window shifted from the fiery brilliance of autumn to the stark, bare-limbed silence of winter. My own body mirrored the change. The potent chemicals designed to kill the rogue cells inside me waged war on the healthy ones, too. My hair fell out in soft clumps, leaving me with a pale, vulnerable scalp. My energy vanished, and on the worst days, just lifting my head from the pillow felt like a monumental effort. And yet, in the midst of this physical decay, something else was happening. A quiet, resilient part of me, the part that had been silenced and invalidated for so long, began to grow. Stripped of my hair, my strength, and my identity as the promising young cellist, I was forced to find out who I was at my very core. I was a fighter. I was a survivor. My pain was real, my voice was valid, and I would not be invisible again. The transformation in my parents was just as profound. The shattering of their denial had left them exposed and raw. The Marcus and Catherine Dubois who had commanded boardrooms and galas ceased to exist. In their place were two frightened, guilt-ridden people trying to navigate a nightmare of their own making. My mother abandoned her social calendar completely. Her days were spent in the uncomfortable chair by my bedside. She brought me books and magazines, her hands fluttering nervously as she arranged them. She tried to tempt my non-existent appetite with bland smoothies and lukewarm soups she brought from home in a thermos. Her attempts at care were clumsy, almost frantic, as if she could somehow undo the past with 1,000 small, present-day gestures. One afternoon, as Clara was adjusting my foredrip, my mother watched with a haunted expression. "I should have known," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The bruises." I thought she was just clumsy. I told her to be more careful. Clara paused, her movements efficient and kind. "The most important thing you can do now, Mrs. Dubois, is be here. Guilt is a heavy blanket. It doesn't keep anyone warm." My father's guilt was a quieter, more suffocating force. He, a man who built things, who solved problems with logic and design, was utterly helpless. He couldn't architect a cure. He couldn't structure a recovery. He would sit for hours, just watching me, his face a study in sorrow. The silence between us was vast, filled with all the things we couldn't say. One night, unable to sleep, I padded out to the nurse's station for a cup of herbal tea. From the family waiting room down the hall, I heard a choked sound. Peeking around the corner, I saw my father, his back to me, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Dr. Reed was with him, speaking in a low, compassionate voice. "I did this to her," he rasped, his voice broken. "My pride, my damnable pride. I was supposed to protect her, and I called her a liar while she was dying." "You're here now, Marcus," Dr. Reed said gently. "That's what matters. Be the father she needs today, not the one you wish you were yesterday." The news of my illness had rippled through Willow Creek. The Duboises' perfect facade was gone, replaced by a story of tragedy and, for those who knew the timeline, a whisper of neglect. The sympathy from their friends was often tinged with a subtle, unspoken judgment. My parents, once the center of their social world, were now objects of pity and gossip. They bore this new reality with a humility that would have been unthinkable just a few months prior. In the wreckage of our old life, a new, more authentic family dynamic began to emerge. Sophie became my staunchest defender. She visited every day after school, her backpack full of homework and stories. She read to me, painted my nails when I was too weak to do it myself, and fiercely guarded my rest. Jessica Miller told people at lunch that you probably got sick because you were too stressed about your conservatory audition, she reported one day, her eyes flashing with indignation. So I told her that was the most ignorant thing I'd ever heard, and that she should spend less time gossiping and more time learning about cellular biology. She puffed out her chest, a miniature warrior. Clara helped me with the wording. Olivia remained my constant. She came every weekend, bringing the outside world into my sterile room. She never treated me like I was fragile or sick. We talked about boys, about terrible movies, about what our friends were up to. She'd help me walk the length of the hospital corridor, my four-pole rolling alongside us, cheering me on for every step. She organized a concert for Annalise at our school, where the orchestra played all my favorite pieces. She even shaved her head in solidarity, showing up at the hospital one Saturday with a beaming smile and a fuzzy scalp. Looking at her, so bold and so loyal, I felt a love so pure it was a balm on my weary soul. After 3 months of intensive treatment, Dr. Reed called us in for a meeting. My parents sat side by side, their hands clenched together. They'd come to dread these official updates, always bracing for the worst. Dr. Reed smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up her serious face. "The chemotherapy is working," she said. "Annalise's in morphological remission. The cancer cells are undetectable in her blood and marrow for now. We still have a long road ahead, consolidation therapy maintenance, but this is the best news we could have hoped for." My mother's tears were immediate, but for the first time, they were tears of relief. My father simply closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. He reached over and took my hand, his grip firm and grounding. However, Dr. Reed continued, her expression turning serious again. "I am making a formal recommendation, a required part of Annalise's ongoing care plan, for family therapy. A year ago, my parents would have balked at the suggestion, viewing it as an admission of failure. Now, they just nodded in unison. There was no argument, no defense. They knew, as I did, that the cancer in my blood was only part of the sickness we had to heal. The therapy sessions were excruciating. We sat in a small, quiet office with a gentle-voiced therapist who guided us through the minefield of our family's dysfunction. We talked about the pressure of perception, about my parents' fear of imperfection, about the deep-seated belief that any problem could be solved by ignoring it. My father spoke of his own demanding father who had taught him that emotion was weakness. My mother spoke of her childhood, where love was conditional upon achievement. It was in that room that my father finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. "I am so sorry, Annalise," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "My biggest fear was failing as a father, and in trying to avoid it, I committed the greatest failure of all. I didn't see you. It wasn't an absolution, but it was a beginning." A year and a half after that terrible day in the music room, I walked out of Willow Creek General for the last time as an inpatient. My hair had grown back, a soft, dark halo that I refused to style, loving its wild freedom. I was still thin, still tired easily, but I was alive. I was in remission. Our house on the hill looked different to me now. The vast glass walls no longer felt like a cage, but simply like windows, letting in the light. The pristine, minimalist interior had been softened. A colorful, ridiculously soft quilt my mother had bought lay draped over the sofa. A stack of Sophie's graphic novels sat on the coffee table. My cello, lovingly repaired by a master luthier, stood not in a dedicated practice room, but in the main living area, a part of our shared space. Life was not perfect. It was not the seamless, curated existence my parents had once strived for. It was messy and complicated and real. My mother still worried, but her worry was now grounded in genuine love, not social anxiety. My father was quieter, more thoughtful. He learned to listen, truly listen, not just to me, but to everyone. He had started to design community centers and public parks instead of just corporate headquarters, finding a new purpose in building for people, not for prestige. One Saturday afternoon in late spring, I found myself alone in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I walked over to my cello. I hadn't played, truly played, since before my diagnosis. The fear that I wouldn't be able to, that the music was lost to me forever, had been too great. I sat down, the familiar weight and shape of the instrument a comfort against my body. My fingers, still a little weak, found their places on the strings. I drew the bow across them and a low, clear note filled the silent house. It wasn't perfect. It was a little shaky, a little uncertain. But it was mine. I began to play, not an intricate Bach suite, but a simple, slow melody I remembered from childhood. The music wasn't for an audition, or a performance, or for anyone's approval. It was just for me. It was the sound of my own survival, a song of gratitude for the harsh, beautiful, painful truth that had allowed me to live. My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound. He didn't speak, just leaned against the frame and listened, a small, sad smile on his face. When I finished, the last note hanging in the air, he walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "That was beautiful, Annalise," he said softly. "I know," I replied, and for the first time, it felt like we were speaking the same language. We weren't the Duboises of Willow Creek anymore, the perfect family in the glass house on the hill. We were just a family, scarred and changed, bound together not by the illusion of perfection, but by the shared, painful, and ultimately healing knowledge of how fragile it all was. We were learning, slowly and imperfectly, to build our lives on a new foundation, one of honesty, forgiveness, and a love strong enough to withstand the truth. And that, I was beginning to understand, was a far more beautiful design than anything we had before.